Hello students, welcome to Royal Palace PU College, Jamkhandi online classes. My name is Sanjay sir and I'll be teaching you biology. Today we will be discussing about a newer topic of this chapter called as organisms and population, and the topic name is responses to abiotic factors. To start this, let me tell you something. We'll consider two types of environments. Environment which is present inside the body of an organism, environment which is present outside the body of an organism. The conditions of the environment changes in these both of the factors, that is inside and outside the body of an organism. Now let me tell you two words called as osmoregulation and thermoregulation. Now sir, what is osmoregulation? See, we have got so many fluids inside our body. Consider those fluids which are present inside the cell, inside the brain, entering into the kidney, entering into the neurons, nerves. All these places have got two conditions, that is solute concentration and the solvent concentration. And in these two concentrations, we find the concentration of salt also. How much concentration of the salt is dissolved in the cytoplasm? How much concentration of the salt is dissolved in the blood? How much salt concentration is entering into the kidney? And what kind of movement and regulation of these fluids are interacting inside the body of an organism is called as osmoregulation. So let me repeat again, osmoregulation is nothing but the maintenance of salt concentration, solute concentration, fluid concentration inside the body of an organism. Another word comes, and that word is thermoregulation. Thermo or therma means temperature. Regulation is maintenance. Now inside the body of an organism, immaterial of the work, there is a maintenance of temperature, and that consideration is called as thermoregulation. Now when we say about regulation, the concepts should be clear. The regulations should be, or the maintenance should be constant. That is, the constant maintenance of the body fluids considering the salt or the fluid conditions inside the body of an organism is called as osmoregulation, and the constant maintenance of temperature inside the body of an organism is called thermoregulation. During the courses of many evolutionary stages, one can really imagine that majority of the organisms have got adaptations, tendency to evolve to maintain a constant internal body temperature called as homeostasis in their body. Now some of the organisms may allow this and some of the organisms may not. Some of the organisms are really homeothermic and some of the organisms are not. We'll see what actually these kind of organisms are. We'll see what kind of a phenomenon that we have to study. We'll see how actually these organisms react to the abiotic factors. The word called as fitness comes into existence now, which means that if an organism is said to be fit in the jungle, in the forest, in the ecosystem, or in the biome, or in the nature, then it should have to have the ability to thermoregulate, the ability to osmoregulate in its body. So the species fitness depends upon its constant maintenance of osmoregulation and thermoregulation. As I told you, there is a word called as homeostasis, which connects to thermoregulation. What is the meaning of homeostasis? Homeostasis is nothing but the process of maintenance of constant internal body temperature called as homeostasis. The temperature which is present outside the body of an organism may highly influence the efficiency of human beings. We'll take the humans as an example here, right? Consider a person is doing a kind of a physical exercises, a kind of a physical work wherein which his optimum efficiency is around at some percentage, let's say 25 degrees Celsius. Now increase in the outside temperature, decrease in the outside temperature, maybe considering 30 degrees Celsius, maybe considering 20 degrees Celsius may affect the effectivity or the work of this person. But the human being can maintain and can regulate the internal body temperature if the outside temperature is more than the inside temperature. Then he can use a refrigerator, he can use air conditioner, he can use some other electronic devices to maintain the outside temperature and the inside temperature. If the temperature is higher, if the temperature is lower from outside, then he can go for heaters to heat up the room, and once again he can regulate the osmoregulation and thermoregulation. But whatever the work, whatever the adaptation, whatever the changes, whatever the variations, whatever the basic works a human did, it does not mean that all the organisms have that kind of tendency to do that. It does not mean that all the organisms can afford refrigerators, or if the organisms know about the air conditioners or room heaters. No, that is not the case. Then how do the organisms cope up with the environment? Some organisms like birds, mammals, some vertebrates and some invertebrates have got this tendency of maintaining the constant body temperature and constant fluid conditions inside the body. As I mentioned previously, that the success of an organism or fitness of an organism is completely dependent on how the organism can thermoregulate and osmoregulate. It may be in Antarctica region or it may be in the desert region. Now we'll enter into a topic called as regulate or regulators. Regulate or regulators is nothing but maintenance of the thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Very easy. A lot of birds, mammals, vertebrates, invertebrates can undergo this regulation process by maintaining thermoregulation and osmoregulation. And even the success and fitness of the organism is completely dependent on how the organisms maintain their thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Let's take our own example here. Our body functions very well at the temperatures of 37 degrees Celsius. Now consider if the external temperature is higher than the internal temperature, then we profusely sweat. We have got skin, we have got sweat glands, and to maintain it to the outside temperature, our body unconsciously, physiologically produces the sweat which maintains our body temperature by lowering it. If the outside temperature is low than the inside temperature, then once again our body unconsciously and physiologically says that we need to shiver now. So I told you 2 points here. Point number 1, in case of the higher temperature, our body starts to sweat profusely. In case of lower temperatures from the outside, our body starts to shiver automatically. These are the conditions wherein which our body is constantly maintaining the homeostasis and bringing down and bringing up the temperatures. Since we have these kind of physiological conditions and regulations inside our body, only we kind of organisms can regulate under variety of circumstances. But if you consider plants are not at all considered as regulators. Let me repeat it again, that in case of humans we can say that they are the regulators, but in case of plants do not have these kind of mechanisms of maintaining the internal body temperature, so the plants are not at all called as regulators. Let us enter into another topic of the responses, and that is conformers. Approximately 99% of the species present on this earth are conformers, which means that they do not have a mechanism of maintenance of constant internal body temperature and fluid conditions inside the body, which means that a lot of organisms are not at all capable of maintaining and regulating osmoregulation and thermoregulation inside their body. And the organisms which do not exhibit the maintenance of constant thermoregulation and osmoregulation are called as conformers. So I've introduced, I'm mentioning two words here. One is regulators and another one is conformers. Regulators are those organisms which can maintain their body temperature and fluid conditions immaterial of the outside temperature and the conditions, which means that constant internal processes. As far as conformers do not maintain that constancy with respect to atmospheric temperature, they tends to change their regulations inside the body. Even we can take the examples of aquatic habitat also. Majority of the organisms which are present in the aquatic habitats, they tend to change their internal and external body temperatures with respect to surroundings. If the surrounding temperature is somewhere around hot, then they tend to change their body temperature inside also. If the external temperature is somewhere around less or down or cold, then once again they keep on change the body temperatures from inside their body. Thermoregulation is practically expensive for the organisms. We can take the examples of shrews, hummingbirds. These are the small creatures or organisms or species whose surface area is smaller, and if the body's surface area is smaller, it is a clearer understanding that their loss of heat from the body is also higher. And I must tell you a fact here: heat loss or heat gain is a function of surface area. Since small animals have a larger surface area relative to their volume, they tend to lose body heat very fast when it is cold outside. Then they have to expend much energy to regulate body heat through the metabolism. Are you understanding? If the organism's height is less and if the organism's width from the surface area is more, and that too in the colder regions, then it is a common understanding that if they are staying, standing, sleeping and doing something onto the ground, since the entire atmosphere is colder in those regions, then it is a common understanding that they tend to lose their body's heat as fast as possible. Now once again they need to regain that heat by doing exercises and by eating a lot of extra and by eating or consuming food, and once again it is expensive to them. This is the mainly reason why very small animals are rarely found in the polar region. If the stressful external conditions are localized or remain only for a short period of the time, the organism has two other alternatives for the survival. The first word is migration. Now, what is migration? Students, listen very carefully. Consider two ecosystems are there, or two places are there, or two habitats are. One is considered as A and another one is considered as B. Now we'll use the word called as hospitable area, favorable area, favorable conditions. So what is the meaning of favorable conditions here? If the atmosphere, if the climate, if the weather, if the habitat, if the area wherein which the organisms are staying, if it is completely happily nicer for the organism's survival and reproduction, then that area and that nature and that forest and that habitat is called as hospitable area, is called as favorable area. Now consider a bird staying in that area, and now for that bird's life it needs somewhere around 30 degrees or 35 degrees for its maximum efficiency. Now suddenly if the temperature increases like 40 degrees or 45 degrees, how the bird can survive in that area. If the temperature decreases suddenly somewhere around 25, 20 or 10 degrees Celsius, how the bird can survive in that area? It's not possible, right? Now consider A is an area which is very hospitable, very favorable. B, we don't know. Let us consider B is also very hospitable, B is also very favorable. Out of 1 year, we have got 3 seasons. In these 3 seasons, sometimes we find higher temperature, sometimes we find lower temperatures, and sometimes we find rainy seasons. Now imagine the conditions of weather and climate and atmospheres of the habitat A is not good now. Now imagine the temperature in case of the A is higher now, is higher. Or imagine the conditions or the weather conditions or the temperature conditions of region A is lower. The basic temperature was around somewhere around 10 degrees, 15 degrees or 30, 20 degrees. Now the temperature is somewhere around 2 degree, 1 degree or minus degree. Now the organisms which are staying in those particular areas feel that since the conditions are changing and these conditions are not at all favorable to us, for our growth and development, we consider these particular conditions as stressful conditions or unfavorable conditions. Now the organism doesn't want to stay there, but it wants to live. It needs to jump, it needs to move from that stressful area and enters into more hospitable area, consider as B. Since 3 different seasons are there, all the seasons are not at all equal in all over the entire earth planet. Okay, it keeps on changing, right? If the A has got that kind of a temperature, it does not mean that B is also having that kind of a temperature. No, if the A is having stressful temperature, then of course we can imagine that B is having hospitable temperature, hospitable area, hospitable habitat, hospitable food, hospitable conditions to live. Now out of 1 year, we can feel that 3 months are stressful in A, but during that time, those 3 months are favorable in B. Now the organisms have got a tendency of moving from a stressful area to a more hospitable area for a temporary period of time, staying there for a while and returning back to their original habitats when the stressful conditions gets over. This is called as migration. We even have to remember an example here, and that example is many thousands of migratory birds, coming from Siberia or some extremely colder regions enter into India's famous Keolado National Park, which is present in Bharatpur, Rajasthan. Now we can understand one thing, that these birds are moving from their stressful area to our hospitable area, which indicates that their stressful area is having very colder conditions and our Rajasthan has got a little warmer, hotter conditions. That's why these birds fly for thousands of kilometers and they come to our place. They just stay for a temporary period of time and they leave our place just by saying that our hospitable areas returned, now we'll go back to our natural habitat or the original habitat. This is called as migration. Dear students, we even have to understand another point, and that point is suspension. So let us enter into another variety of conformity called as suspension. What is suspension? This is also another method of conformity wherein which the organisms are not at all able to maintain their constant body temperature and constant fluid conditions inside their body. When the stressful conditions occur, these organisms stop all their metabolic activities, their growth, their development for a temporary period of time. Stopping in the sense completely blocking all the metabolic activities for that particular stressful area or particular stressful time. And once again deactivating themselves when the stressful time or the area gets over. This is called as suspension. Suspension you can find in 3 types of organisms. Point number 1, encystment, that is observed in the microorganisms, especially in case of bacteria or some other organisms which are microorganisms. When the stressful conditions occur, these microorganisms form a coat-like structure onto their body which is filled with protein in them, and when the stressful conditions occur, they get the nutrition from these protein sources, and when the stressful condition gets over, they hatch out by creating smaller spores, which is also called as a sporulation. And here the formation of protective cover is called as or the cyst-like layer is called as encystation. Right? So students, I have given one word in case of a suspension, and that is encystment, which is observed in case of microorganisms under stressful conditions. Now let us enter into another topic of suspension, and that is hibernation. Sir, what is the meaning of hibernation? Suspending or stopping all the metabolic activities under the stressful conditions when the stressful condition is winter or low temperature or colder condition. We'll take the example of the polar bear here. This bear enters into the hibernation by digging a cave-like structure and entering into it and staying there for the 2 to 3 months, just by saying that it is stopping all the metabolic activities, not doing any kind of physiological conditions or nothing, just stopping all the activities. And under the winter conditions or the colder conditions and stopping all these activities is called as hibernation. We'll take the example of polar bear. The next word is aestivation. Same kind of definition, but a little change. Suspending or stopping all the metabolic activities or physiological activities or the growth and the development under stressful conditions as the summer. So as the winter conditions connecting to hibernation, the same kind of a definition here, but in the summer conditions connecting to aestivation, that is higher temperature conditions. We'll take the examples of frogs, we'll take the examples of snails, we'll take the examples of fishes, etc. in case of aestivation. The last point of suspension is a diapause. Diapause is also the suspended growth, suspended development of some organisms under the stressful conditions. It is called as diapause. It can be observed in some zooplanktons also. See students, I can give many examples considering migration, considering suspension, considering a lot of things, but as I mentioned you in the beginning of this channel itself, that I'll be telling only those topics which are present in our NCERT textbook. Other than that, I am not at all going for any kind of extra examples here. Why? Because it will confuse us. Only that is required, that only we will study. Otherwise, there is no need of studying extra information, because the book is filled with a lot of information that we need for this year. That is more than enough. Try to understand me. Now students, as I started my explanation from how actually the organisms cope up with the external environment, I told you that there are some organisms which can maintain 2 points, 2 phenomena, that they are thermoregulators and that they are osmoregulators. If the organisms can maintain the constant body temperature as homeostasis as thermoregulation and constant fluid conditions as the osmoregulation inside their body, immaterial of the external temperature, is called as regulators or homeotherms. If the organisms do not change, cannot change, or not at all possible to change the constancy or if the external temperature is changing, then inside body temperature is also changing, then that particular phenomenon is called as conformers. We can consider human beings as regulators. We do not have to consider plants as the regulators, because plants do not have that kind of mechanism. We can consider 99% of the plants and animals as the conformers, wherein which the internal body temperature changes with respect to the external body temperature. I even told you that heat loss or heat gain is a function of body's surface area. The colder regions do not have or have very less number of short animals or smaller animals, or the animals which are smaller in size, because larger the surface area of an organism have got larger release or wastage of the heat from their body. After that, I entered into another topic called as suspension, wherein which I told you what is the meaning of suspension, which is nothing but stopping all the activities or all the metabolic workabilities of the body, suspending the growth for the temporary period of time, wherein which I mentioned some names such as aestivation, hibernation, encystation, diapause, etc., etc. I even told you about migration also, which is nothing but the temporary movement of organisms from one stressful area to more hospitable area and returning back when the stressful area gets over or stressful conditions gets over. Now I hope students you understood these topics. I hope that these videos are helping you. I hope that you are going in a good direction. I hope that from each and every time I am making the videos are taking you in a positive way.